Emmanuel here. Quick moment for economics. I've got questions now. The semiconductor trade. Yeah. So, want to talk specifically about two principles of trade. Ricardo's principle of comparative advantage and Paul Krugman's new trade theory, right? And how these two factor in to try to explain what's going on with international trade in semiconductor devices, right? Of which there's a very wide range. Now, Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage in sum says this: countries do naturally and should focus in the production of those goods for which they have a comparative advantage. That is, the goods for which they have a lower opportunity cost in producing relatively, right? Relative to another country. That is, if Kenya is better at producing tea than Uganda, but Uganda is better at producing bananas, and better meaning that Kenya would incur a lower opportunity cost to produce tea than like Uganda would have to give up the production of many, many more, say, batches of bananas in order to produce tea, but they would produce it less efficiently than Kenya. Let's put it even more, maybe succinctly, simpler, right? But what we're trying to say is produce those goods for which you have a lower cost of, you're more efficient, right? It costs less for you to produce than another country. And cost here is about what you have to give up. So that's why I would say, it's cheaper for Kenya to produce tea than it is for Uganda. Now, this is supposed to hold true for the range of goods in which countries trade. But one might notice that, wait a minute, there's other countries producing tea also. It's not just Kenya. And maybe some of these countries produce tea cheaper than Kenya can. There's other countries producing flowers and so on. Okay, so how can this be explained? Because it seems that some countries are not just focusing on the comparative advantage. Well, part of it is two things. We could talk about two things. Number one, the variety of demand, right? Consumer choice. Consumers want to pick and choose from a whole different range of products. I want to choose between yellow dresses and blue dresses, right? I want to be able to choose. For whatever reason, which we will not cover here today. Some people like red dresses, others like pink dresses, right? So, that being so, then producers will actually find that they can meet this range of demand, and they could actually produce a variety of, they could contribute to the variety of goods. The other question is a question of economies of scale. So if you have economies of scale as a producer, you could actually produce goods for which you do not have a comparative advantage. So you could produce, so this explains why, say, China, for all intents and purposes, all things being equal, produces less, what is it? The cars that they produce are of a lower quality than, say, German cars. But China is in the trade anyway. Part of that is because they've achieved economies of scale. So all these different firms in China that are producing and trying to export cars, they have some level of economies of scale that permit them entry into the market. Right? They can still make some revenue. So you combine those two facts, then you might also find that maybe one producer can't meet all the demand. And it goes on. But we focus on those two principles. This is what Paul Krugman tried to lay out in his attempt to explain that, okay, perhaps to add to what David Ricardo had proposed so many years ago. So when we come to the trade in semiconductor products, then we find that China is producing semiconductor products, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea. And if we focus even just on integrated circuits, of which we mentioned in another video, that it's a more value added, right? More value added type of a semiconductor product, then again, Taiwan is producing them, Japan is producing them, China is producing them, even the United States. So, and then we find that countries, not only that, but countries are actually exporting integrated circuits and importing them. So China is exporting them and importing them. Why could that be? Go back to those two principles we laid out, consumer preference, right? Which brings about variety in the market. In this case, maybe I'm making devices that need a very specific kind of chip that a Chinese, my fellow Chinese manufacturer is not manufacturing. So maybe I've got to cross the strait, the ocean, off to Japan and import their chips, and import a specific kind of chip that I can use. United States, same thing. Cheers. It's been Emmanuel. A few questions on economics. Ciao.